Hello, everyone. A very good evening, morning, and afternoon to all of you who have joined today. And we are meeting after 2 weeks. I'm so excited to hear from you. We have had a Diwali, the biggest festival in India. And what's more interesting, so meeting after 2 weeks, getting to speak to you guys. And thanks a lot for all your support. We are reaching towards the end of the year, and we have completed now more than 52 workshops. I think this is our 53rd workshop, and thank you, Dipen, for joining in with us today for this 53rd workshop. So, I just wanted to ask you, what gives you uh, more enlightenment and more knowledge than just hearing from one who have already experienced it? That's why we have Dipen from us with us today. Dipen is a product designer based in Bangalore. He loves solving complex real-world problems by creating simple and beautiful solutions on the web and mobile. He has worked on consumer and enterprise products in various industries across different platforms like websites, M sites, mobile apps, and enterprise web applications. Welcome, Dipen, and
Thank you
thank
so
you
much.
for doing this for the ProApp audience. And the stage is all yours.
Thank you so much for the lovely introduction. And, thank you everyone all across India and across the globe to come and join on a Saturday evening and, come to learn a little bit about design. And I like to share my journey, across a span of, 15 years. So I'll just present my screen. So yeah, what I would like to talk about is, what is my design journey been, and what are my learnings, in the career of design. Before I like to start, I just want to give a quick introduction about myself. Hi, I'm Dipen. I'm a self-taught designer. I'm born and brought up in Mumbai, and I have, I'm a commerce graduate, and I've worked with some of the leading brands like PalmEasy, Flipkart, Stazilla, Rediff, Sony Entertainment Television, and Times of India. So, mine has been a very interesting journey and a roller coaster ride in terms of, the entire design journey. I happened to join design by chance, right? I'm a commerce graduate, and at that point in time, around 14, 15 years back, I realized that, I didn't want to go in the normal, art, science, commerce, because that back then they were very, limited, options to, choose a career from. Um, so, in the early days, computers started becoming a fad, and I bought a computer during my graduation, and I didn't want to do a CA or an MBA, post graduation, right? So I joined an institute called Workstation, and where I learned about some of the basic design tools like Photoshop, Dreamweaver, HTML, and CSS, and that's how I landed up with my first job in design. Right. The initial part of my career was working with companies like Times of India and Sony Entertainment Television, where I joined and worked on the web related modules. Right. Times of India and Sony Entertainment Television being media companies, we had to design websites, microsites, banners, and creators for their content online. They wanted a presence online. After that, I joined Rediff.com, and that's where I got first-hand exposure of the entire design thinking process. What is UI, UX, and all of that, right? In 2014, I moved to Bangalore, and I joined a company called Flipkart, and that's where I got a bigger exposure to bigger team, where there are around 50 odd UX designers, a big design team, and how good the problem solving space is, right? At scale. After Flipkart, I joined a bunch of startups like Stazilla, Spire Technologies, and then currently I'm working as a lead product designer in pharmacy since the last 4 years in the supply chain domain. Right? So this is just a bit of introduction about myself, and you can follow me on Twitter and LinkedIn um, for more information. So, what are the topics that I'll cover, and who is this, talk for, or the workshop for, right? So, this is basically for aspiring designers, mid-level designers, as well as senior designers who are trying to navigate through the designer journey. And I hope, at the end of this talk, I'll be able to have some takeaways for everyone who, are, navigating through their design journey, right? So, I'll try and just give you perspective in terms of some of the topics which I'm trying to cover, right? So these are purely my views, and I'll just try to cover what I understand of design, and what has my journey been, right? So the initial few slides will talk about what is design according to me in a broader context, what are different categories of design, what are the principles of good design, what are the different design roles and job titles in the current industry, what do designers really do at work, right? And what are the most important skills required to become a designer. Then what are some of the things that typically one should consider while applying for a design career job, right? Then what is the typical design hiring and job selection criteria that should be there. What are typical mistakes that a person should avoid in a portfolio or a design interview. Then what once a person actually gets into a design job, what are the first few things that a person should do in a design job, right? And then how do you know at the end of whenever you're working or when you're applying to switch, right? Have you grown as a designer when you reflect back, right? And lastly, what are some of the design references which I use or I have used to come through the journey of of being a designer. So what exactly is design, right? So at a broader level, design is problem solving, keeping user at the heart, right? But I'll just try to give you a little bit of a broader definition, and I'll just read it out, right? Design is a vast term which touches each and every aspect of the lives. It is the process of envisioning and planning, right? The creation of objects, interactive systems, buildings, vehicles, and it is user centered, keeping users at the heart with the design thinking approach, right? It's about creating solutions for people, physical items, or abstract systems to address the need of problem. So in short, design is something that makes our lives worth living, right? Initially, in the design career, I had a very myopic view that design is something which is very beautiful and stuff like that, right? But when I look at this definition and over the design journey, there are design is much broader than that, right? So what are the different categories of design, and when you say a product or something is very well designed, right? So here are some of the design fields which are there, and our digital design space is a very small part of the thing, which is basically into IT and multimedia design, right? So when we talk about different categories of design, we can talk about well designed or well planned cities, right? Like Hyderabad has good infrastructure, or you can you look at the airports, right? Singapore airport or Bangalore airport, how well it is designed, right? Purely from space as well as usability and all. Then there is different gardens, exhibition stall design which are there, right, where people come and visit. um, Different products we use in our day-to-day lives, right? Right from mobile phones to spoons, forks, packaging, right? Graphic design, and there is IT and multimedia design, which we are generally a part of, right? When we talk about, so what are the principles of good design, right? So uh, Dieter Rams basically is a very famous guy and German industrial designer, right? And he's won several international awards and acclamations, for his work in design, right? And he came up with timeless design principles, which not only apply to physical design but also digital design as well, right? So Dieter Rams, worked in two companies. One is Brown, and second is Visto. So Brown is basically a company which is into electrical and home appliances, products, right? So here are some of the good products that he had designed, right? These are not extensive, but just to give a flavor, that they are so beautiful, aesthetic, and durable as well, right? So. so Brown is a company where there are electrical razors, then there are radio, then there is um, you can talk about calculator, mixer, and other type of products that he had designed, right? And they are still considered to be one of the good examples of design, right? And he came up with these 10 design principles, which are very popular, as well as which are timeless, right? So I just talk about some of these design principles and with a few examples maybe, right? So good design is innovative, right? So what do we mean by innovative design, right? So as technology keeps on changing on a day-to-day basis, right? uh, you know it has made our lives better, right? So let's talk about a phone, right? So earlier we had wired phones, then there came pager, then we had walkie talkies, then there came a standard phone of Siemens or Ericsson and all at that point in time, right? And then we came up with smartphones, right? So each product at because of technology has evolved and has become better, right? So design is innovative, right? Good design makes a product useful, right? Typically it means uh, good design is utilitarian. It serves the purpose what is supposed to do, right? Good design is aesthetic as well, right? You know even though beauty is subjective, right? Anyone, there's no one who does not like a good design product, right? Be it a well designed car or a good looking home and stuff like that. So that is the first impression which is there. uh, Good design makes the product understandable, right? So by just looking at the product, right, you understand what it is meant for, right? um, it is self-explanatory in that sense. Good design is unobtrusive, right? It typically means that there are not too many distractions, and it does not have uh, too many things which are not necessary, right? Good design is honest. It typically means that it is not manipulative, and it sticks to what it says, right? It does not make any false promises. It does the job what it's required to do. Good design is also long lasting, right? So when you look at well designed products that last for years, right? A few years back, our parents and the older generation used to use TVs or washing machines, and this thing that used to last decades as well, right? So good design has to be long lasting as well. uh, Good design is also thorough down to the last detail, right? Which typically means that uh, it covers each and every use case and edge case, right? Which is there, right? It is all the use cases are covered properly. Good design is also environmental friendly, right? It typically, if you look at the evolution of cars as well, right? Earlier they were petrol, diesel, and now there's electric vehicle, because we want to actually look at the environment perspective, right? Also look at a festival which is celebrated, which is Ganesha festival, right? Now we have eco-friendly Ganesha as well, looking at the environment friendliness, right? And good design is as little design as possible, right? Good design is minimal, right? It just show the user what is the bare minimum required, and do not clutter them with too much information which is there, right? So these are some of the design principles which are generally applicable in all aspects of physical as well as digital product design. Now, when I talk about designer job title, right, I'm talking about the product and the digital design space, right? So when we talk about designer job titles, right, we all have applied for a job in a design role, right, at some point in time, right? And even right now I sometimes get confused with too many confusing job titles, right? Which are like a rockstar designer or a ninja designer, a 10K designer, or a interaction designer, or a UX writer and stuff like that, right? So I'll just try to decode in terms of what is my understanding of these job titles, and what is a broad framework in terms of uh, the actual role which a person does, right? So according to me, there are just three, roles which a company is looking at, right? Now I'll just break it down for you. Typically, there are, two types of companies, right? There's a service-based company, and there's a product-based company, right? A service-based company is where you work with, multiple clients, and switch from one project to other, every few months, right? Versus a product based company is basically where you have a e-commerce company or a fintech company, and it's trying to build a product from scratch, and you keep on understanding the matrix, as well as how the product evolves, right? And in the product design space as well, product based companies, there are two types of breakups, right? One is a B2B company, and one is a B2C company, right? So a B2C company is typically, the end consumer is us, right? A e-commerce app, or a, pharmacy app where you order medicines, or order, items online, right? Or order food, right? It's typically for the end consumer. But a B2B company is basically for, different businesses, right? So broadly, there are these two type of companies. And, typically, there are startups as well as established companies, right? A startup is typically a company which has around a very small design team, whereas established company has a very large design team, right? So the job titles as well as the design roles and functions will differ from a startup and a established company. Typically, there are these three, roles which typically, startups or established companies looked at. Um, in an established company, there are, clear cut, segregation of departments as well as roles, right? There's a creative design team, then there is a, visual design team, there's a UX design team, there's a research team, so on and so forth. There are specific functions, because the design team is big, the um, budgets are large, and you have a liberty of different roles, right? And each role is very specific in terms of what a person does. Versus in a startup, right? A designer is supposed to be a hybrid mix of doing multiple things, right? Juggle between creating sometimes banners or aesthetic, or actually research as well as UX design. So I'll just try and again simplify these three terms for you, right? Typically, there are just there is visual design, and there is a experience design, as a function. Now in visual design, there is graphic as well as UI design. Now graphic designer is typically a guy who works on social media, banners, creatives, and that's his typical job and work, right? Versus a UI designer, right, is basically a user interface designer who actually works on designing interfaces. It can be for mobile, it can be for desktop, it can be for iPad, or it can be for wearables, or screens as well, correct? um, and finally, there is an experienced designer who actually looks at the problems for solving space in terms of creating personas, creating user flows, creating user journeys, understanding their pain points, creating wireframes, as well as coming up with little bit of research, right? Now typically in a startup, right, a designer is supposed to at some point in time do a little bit of banners or stuff like that. Sometimes he and most of the times he'll be juggling between create doing a little bit of research, creating wireframes, doing some user journey, as well as creating the end deliverable, which is the UI design, right? um, Versus in an established company, a visual designer will probably work with a UX or an interaction designer, and then come up with a solution, so together, right? uh, Also in established companies, you have other set of specific roles, right, like UX researchers or motion designers, who actually are specific roles in itself. So as I mentioned, right, um, even though there are these so many confusing job titles, right, typically it falls under these three buckets. And a startup will look at a hybrid mix of doing all of this, versus established organization might be looking at very specific skills when they look for a design hire, right? uh, Now, what are the typical skills which are required to be a designer, right? So typically, a very good quote which I heard is, right, like hard skills will actually get you the job, versus soft skills will actually help you stay in the job. Now I'll talk about what are the typical hard skills which are there, right? Now, hard skills is understanding of the design domain where you actually want to go in, right? Like if you are a visual designer, or a UX designer, then you need to understand where whether you understand the design domain, as well as what exactly are your strengths and weaknesses, right? In terms of whenever you are applying for a job. Second is basically understanding the basic design principles of the job function that you're looking at, right? So some of the basic design principles can be understanding the jet stalls principles of design, or knowing the material design or the iris guidelines, right, or the grid design system, bootstrap system, right? Also understanding the design process or the design thinking approach. Some of the basic requirements are that. Now design tools can be kind of very tricky, but a designer needs to be cognizant and be aware of the latest design tools, and he has to just master one, right? So these days Figma is one of the most popular tools, but people are still using Sketch and Adobe XD as well, right? So understanding of some of the design tools is also very critical, right? And finally understanding and having a knowledge of HTML, JavaScript, and CSS, a basic knowledge is very critical, right? The reason being, once you are in a job, right, you have to also, talk to the developers as well as the QAs, right, in terms of understanding the tech feasibility. So if you don't have a good understanding of HTML, JavaScript, and CSS, right, you will probably end up making too many iterations, and then, these will not be even tech feasible, right? So these are the basic must have in terms of the hard skills which are typically required to actually do a job. Now, what are the soft skills which are typically there, right? Now, uh, soft skills, when I talk about, it's generally the awareness, right? Now, awareness, can be at various levels, right? Understanding about, you know, what are your strengths and weaknesses, and you need to be very cognizant of that, right, in your design journey, right? And you are the best judge of yourself. So when I talk about strengths and weaknesses, it can be, let's say, if you are a good visual designer, right, and if you're working in a team of people, right, so even though you might be good at the deliverable or the visual design skill, right, are you also good at design documentation? Are you also good at presenting things? Are you also good and aware of speaking and building relationships with other people, right? So understanding the strengths and weakness and having the awareness really helps, right? And for that you need a growth mindset, right? So typically there are two types of mindset, right? A fixed mindset and a growth mindset. There's a popular book called Mindset by Carol Dweck, and it's a very good book just to understand what typical growth and a fixed mindset means. But I'll just give you a brief concept, right? A fixed mindset people is basically they are very comfortable in their own space, and they don't want to change, right? Versus a growth mindset is always curious and always trying to improve himself on a day-to-day basis by observing and being interested in genuinely interested in learning new things, right? So that is very important, right? Problem solving ability, some might say it is a very basic necessity for a designer. But when I talk about problem solving skills, it is whenever you're working on a feature or a product, right, do you directly jump into the solutioning, right, and take it on the face value, or are you looking at the first principles approach in terms of, how do you apply that into your day-to-day life, right? The first principles approach is nothing but, you look at, asking a lot of whys, as well as, understanding the root cause of why you're trying to solve a problem, rather than trying to, jump it into a solution at a surface level, right? So, problem solving ability is also very important, right? Now, communication, right? Communication can be broken down into two parts, right? Visual, verbal communication, as well as oral communication. Now, how well you communicate via email, how do you talk to people, right? The tone of voice, right? Is also very important, in also conveys how good you are as a designer, right? Next is, about relationships, right? uh, in the end, apart from work, right, is the relationships that you build with your peers, in terms of your peer designers, your PMs, your developers, or anyone, right? That actually helps you define, your career, because, then you'll be able to, pick the right battles, as well as, have get things sorted out quickly if they are stuck, right? And in the end, the last skill which is required is the art of influencing, right? Typically, if you're not able to sell your designs, right, then, you'll have a very hard time in terms of, and you'll be left frustrated as a designer at every point in time, right? So knowing what to present and how to present to every stakeholder differs, and you need to be very open and, aware of, how do you learn that skill, right? It's a very important skill, and it goes a long way in terms of, your career, right? Be it, presenting your designs and getting it approved, or, getting approval for design hires when you go, at a, lead or a managerial level, and also asking for budgets as well, right? So I think that is very critical. Now, what are some of the things which are required, to be considered while applying for a design tool, right? Typically, what I've noticed is, people are looking at, fancy job titles, or, fancy offices, or, good compensation, because, design these days have become a very lucrative field, right? And a lot of designers are generally attracted towards it, because, design is gaining a lot of visibility, right? But I think, apart from these two or three factors, there are, these uh, 10 things which I generally feel are much more important, and, they play an equal role in terms of deciding, where and, how to apply for a design role, right? So first thing is location, right? So a location is extremely important in terms of, shaping up your career, right? If you're living in a tier 2, tier 3 city like a Jaipur or an Indore, right, versus if you're living in a, a city like, Bangalore or Hyderabad, right? Purely from an opportunity point of view, and the kind of talent that you get, right, in terms of the peers, as well as the, design folks that you meet, right? There's going to be a huge lot of difference, right? So location plays a very key role. Second is the industry and domain, right? So typically, whenever a designer starts applying, for a company in a LinkedIn, right, they often make the mistakes of, applying for, what is hot and trending, right? Let's say, there is, crypto, or, the metaverse, or AR and VR, which are generally, these is very much in the trend, right? So I would say that, while these are good, but if a person understands and is aware that, what his strengths and weaknesses are, and what domain he knows and he's comfortable with, I think he'll be able to, work and, solve that problem space better, right? For example, for me, I realize that, I might be good at, e-commerce, or healthcare, or a fintech domain, right? And probably, uh, it makes sense for me to apply to those companies or industries, because I think I'll be able to understand the problem space and be able to do justice better, versus if I apply to a crypto space, or basically a metaverse, right? Even though if I get a job, then I might not be able to do a job, because I might not enjoy, or, I might not be able to do justice in terms of, doing well in that problem space, right? Also understanding the company, right? uh, is very important, right? Have you done research in terms of the company, in terms of the founders, and also how stable is the company in terms of funding and all, right? Plays an important role. Finally, the work that you do is also very important, right? The type of work that you do in on a day-to-day basis will define, your career longevity, right? If you're not enjoying what you're doing at your work, right, then you might not even stick to design field for a longer period of time, right? So it's very critical to understand, whenever you're applying for a job, look at the description, and also understand, from the design hiring manager, like, what exactly is the expectation from the design role, right? uh, People, right? Indian, you're also working with people, right? So whenever you're applying, for a design role, right, there will be typically 4 to 5 rounds, and you'll be interacting with a few folks, right? It can be a design hiring manager, or a senior designer, or a PM, or a developer, or a engineering head, right? So just by interacting with them, you'll get a sense of how these people are, and whether you'll be enjoying working with them, or your thinking matches or not, right? And also you need to do a background check if you get a job, in terms of speaking with other people about the company and the work culture as well, right? So company culture also makes a huge lot of difference, right? How flexible it is, right? In terms of flexible work hours, or whether it is fully remote, whether it is hybrid, or it requires you to work on site, right? Whether it is hierarchical, or flat organization structure as well, right? Also, design maturity in the organization really is very important. When I talk about design maturity, right, how much the company values design, right? Is really important. uh, and finally, the team dynamics as well, right? Like, um, how big or small the design team is, and what kind of roles and responsibilities are there for this thing, right? Is there a very big design team, or a designer supposed to do multiple roles, and how well defined the team is, right, is also a very critical themes in terms of the verticals, as well as the design breakup within the team. And the last two things that definitely are important, right, in terms of compensation. But we talk about compensation as well, right, purely from a wealth creation perspective, not just a salary, right? I think the ESOPs is also a very important part, because typically, whenever you're looking for a job, right, you look purely from a longevity, from a career perspective. You want to stick for an organization, learn for a longer period of time, right? So when if you look for a stable company, and if you get good ESOPs, right, then I think purely from a wealth creation, you'll be able to create a lot of wealth, right? And finally, in terms of benefits and perks, right? When we talk about benefits and perks, it's about typically, we talk about generally the leaves policy, or the how much insurance they give, right? Or how much budgets they have in terms of training and development, and allowing the designer to actually learn, and go to design meetups or conferences and stuff like that. So these are some of the things that person or designer should look at. We all know that design hiring typically takes 2 weeks to 2 months, right? There might be 4 to 5 rounds, and based on the seniority and the level that you're applying for, right, it varies from company to company, right? And we know how frustrating it is, and sometimes how broken the design process is, and it can be very frustrating, right? So typically, applying for a job is the first impression that a candidate has with the company, right? So first impression is the most important, and the lasting impression which a person has, right? So just as the company is evaluating you as a candidate, right, you also as a designer should evaluate the company in terms of how they are with the design hiring process, right? So when you look at the design hiring, right, what does a typical ideal process look like, right? Typically, a good company which can attract good talent has these following criteria, right? Firstly, they have very specific and clear cut job descriptions, right? It is very crisp and clear, right? Secondly, they have a very clear cut, defined interview process, right, in terms of the number of rounds, and who's going to take which interview, and it is very clear. The next is very set and explicit expectations, right, from the candidate as well, right, which typically means that the upfront, they will actually say that this uh, role is basically for this vertical, for this department, and you'll be working with this team on this product, right? It has to be that explicit, right? And they're looking for, let's say, a senior role or a junior role or something of that sort, right? Also, one of the things which typically is largely missed is, right, how the recruiters actually follow up with the candidate, right? Typically in the design hiring, there might be a lot of follow-ups that might be required, right? There the candidate might be busy, or the design manager might be busy, or there might be some holiday that might be coming up, right? Or the link might be broken, right? So how good the follow-up with the candidate from the design manager and the recruiter, right, in terms of each and every step of the design process really helps, right? Also, in terms of how accommodating is the company, and understanding in terms of you as a candidate, right, which typically means that you if you clearly set expectations, right, that you're also applying for other roles, right, parallelly, and you have a timeline of 2 to 3 weeks, for this thing, right? How accommodating are they in terms of trying to shorten and make the interview process quick, and also rescheduling if there is some important emergency or a meeting which has come up, right, and they have to reschedule. Also, how consistent and unbiased it is for all, right? Does it vary from candidate to candidate, but whether it is biased also typically is a very big factor when you look at design hiring process, right? And what is the typical feedback loop, right? At every stage, right, right from the job application stage, for that to the first round, to the last round, as well as if a candidate is rejected also for some reason, right? How is the feedback loop, right, is generally very important, and it generally creates a lasting impression, right? So even though if the candidate has not been able to perform well, right, I think it is very important for the candidate to know, right, why he was rejected, or what was the reason for that, right? And lot of times, most of the times, you might really not get an answer, right? So what should we as designers do, right, when this hiring process is broken, right? So firstly, at each and every stage, you as a designer, you need to be very confident and ask a lot of questions upfront, right, in the introduction round with the design manager, or to the recruiter, in terms of just understanding what is this role, which function it is, what are the salary expectations which are there, what are the working hours which are there, or the typical number of rounds which are going to be held, right? It is very important for the candidate to ask the questions upfront, because it sets the expectation both to the company as well as the candidate, in terms of the right expectations, right? And finally, you as a candidate also has a right to know at each and every step, right, whether you were selected or rejected, and what was the reason for it, right? So you should also be proactive, even if the company or the recruiter has not really got back to you, right? You should ask upfront, right, what is the status of my interview process, did it go ahead, and how can I improve, right? And what was the feedback which I can do to improve, and in the next round. uh, this is something which typically, what are some of the most common design mistakes which people make during a design portfolio or interview or a resume, right? Now let's talk about a resume, right? Resume is the first impression, as well as the portfolio is the first impression that you send to the recruiter as well as hiring manager, right? So typically a design hiring manager might be looking at multiple profiles, and you are not the only profile who is looking at, right? And they have a very short time to look at, right? So typically there will be just 2 to 3 minutes just to scan the resume as well as the portfolio. And what typically design hiring managers look at is basically whether you are the right fit or not for the company and the role which you are applying for, right? And for that, there are some basic hygiene that needs to be there, right? One thing is, grammatical errors is a big no-no, right? You need to be very, clear in terms of, whenever you are sharing your resume and portfolio, look at, typos or grammatical errors whenever you are applying. Second is, this is generally a flaw, and typically, it's a kind of bad thing as well. But generally, when you're looking to too many profiles, right, your memory and the is very short, right? So you don't want too much copy or verbose information, right? So have a mix of less content, very visual, or very crisp and clear in terms of bulleted points to just explain your resume as well as portfolio, right? It really helps because design hiring managers will not have too much time to read each and every aspect of your resume and portfolio, right? Next thing is faking, right? In the end, if you fake in terms of okay, the degree or the certification or the experience that you have, right? Even though if you get the job, you will probably people will find out with the job reference, or when you are in the job, the hiring person or the manager will find out that you had faked in the interview, right? So that really creates a wrong impression for the candidate as well. A lot of times you notice that it is inconsistent to the role you applied for. Like I've seen a lot of designers wanting to apply for a product design role, but in the portfolio they share screens or just visual designs, right? Which is very inconsistent, right? So it creates a wrong impression and it sets a wrong expectation, right? A lot of times designers also make the mistake of uh, thinking that your role and contribution is very obvious, right? But you need to make it very simple and very laymanish in terms of writing what was your role, what was your contribution each every project, and how did you contribute, right? Also lack of context is which is seen generally, right? um, People directly jump into the solutioning rather than trying to explain what is the domain, what is the problem you are trying to solve, right? A lot of times the person who's interviewing you may not be knowing the domain or the problem statement you might be solving. So it's better to explain the context before showing the solutioning that you've tried to show it in a portfolio. Lack of process, right? Again, whenever you're showing a portfolio, a lot of times people just show the problem statement and directly show the screens or the end result, right? But typically a hiring manager is looking at the entire process of how you arrived at the design, right, rather than the end deliverable, right? Even though that is important, but how you arrived and what was your thinking, right? Typically is what the design hiring manager looks at. Um, I think lack of recent examples is also one of the key things, right? Now, uh, one of the things people design hiring managers also look at is trying, if you're applying for a healthcare or fintech domain, right? And if you are starting off as a fresher, right? I think your CV or portfolio will get noticed if you show one of the projects which are basically in the healthcare or the fintech space, right? A hiring manager is looking at work that is actually relevant to your the problem space that you are being applied for, right? That is very important. So it's better to show at least 3 to 4 projects, and which are kind of diverse, right? One can be of a different domain. Then it has to be a mix of web, mobile, and app, right? um, so a flavor will actually give the breadth of your understanding, as well as will also set the expectation from a designer that the person is not really restricted to just web projects or mobile apps, right? And the last point is about output versus outcomes, right? Most designers make the mistake of showing that, okay, I've worked on for so long, and and I made so many screens, and worked on so many iterations, right? But in the end, designer hiring managers are also looking at what is the actual metrics, and what is the outcome of the project, right? What problem did it solve, and how did it move the matrix, right? That is the most important and the critical thing which typically is required. uh, let's say you have actually got a design job, right? I think the first few weeks are very critical in terms of getting hired as a designer, right? Now, uh, whenever you are in a design job, right, I think as I said, it's very important to be very curious and understand the company and the business first, right? Because if you don't understand the business, and once you directly work on starting working on a feature, you'll not be able to do justice, right? So understanding the business, understanding the founders company mission, vision, and goals, right, will help you align in terms of what are the expectations, right? From the company, as well as the feature that you're developing. Understanding the organization structure, right? Who are the key stakeholders, who will actually get your designs approved, right? And is very important, right, to know. Also understanding and knowing your team, right? Your peers, right? Your design partners, as well as your PMs, developers, and QAs will actually help you to understand what are the things which are required. Also, you need to be involved in multiple design threads, involve yourself in meetings, and jiras which are typically there, right? Finally, once you are onboarded into the company, right, you'll find there are a lot of design processes which are set or which are not set in the company when you're applying for, when you've joined, right? So you need to be very aware and be cognizant that, okay, these are some of the design processes which are there, and these are some of the things which can be improved. Like, a lot of times there's a product, existing product which is there, you are supposed to work on the product, but you realize that um, there's no documentation which was already created, right? So you can start off by suggesting and improving the process by documenting the user flows, product lifecycle journeys, and stuff like that, right? It will start creating a process, right? And try to fix other existing design process issues, right? Whether in terms of a Figma files structure and stuff like that, right? Finally, it's very critical to build relations, right? Because that will actually define how you choose your battles, as well as how you get your designs approved, right? Because build in the post COVID era, right, it becomes very critical that a lot of times the relationships have become transactional, right? Once you were in office, right, it was very easy to just go to a desk and just say hi, hello, or meet for a chai, and discuss about things apart from work. But with the hybrid or the remote working, right, relationships have become transactional. You just are talking to faceless people on the call, and you're just talking about work, right? So I think it's extremely critical to build relationships outside of work, even in a remote environment. That goes in a long way in terms of getting things resolved when things are stuck, right? I think that is very critical. uh, Finally, as you've progressed in your design career, right, how do you know whether you've actually grown as a designer, right? So typically, I don't look at fancy job titles, right? Because a startup, in a startup, you might generally progress very faster, and typically, a director or a VP of designs you can become in 4 to 5 years as well. Versus in an established company, let's say a FANG company like Google, Microsoft, or Facebook and stuff like that, you take around 20-25 years to actually come to that position, right? So job titles are vary, from company to company or organization to organization, right? But purely looking at, how you can evolve as a designer, right? And whether you've grown as a designer, depends on, a few factors, right? So typically, when you start off as a fresher or a junior designer, right, you will generally work on smaller set of features, right? As you become confident and you go to a senior designer project, you'll be working on a big feature or a big project, right? As then take on more responsibilities, you handle multiple projects, and you'll be handled to actually mentor a few set of designers as well, right? Junior designers, right? Then once you go into a managerial role, right, you'll be doing mix of strategy, you'll be hiring, as well as you will be handling multiple projects and mentoring a set of designers. And when you are in a leadership position, right, you'll be also looking at a broad level in terms of the budgeting strategy, as well as allocation of resources and people management. It's mostly a people management role, right? So mostly there are three factors which I look at. One is the responsibilities that you handle. The complexity of problems, keeps on increasing, and the ambiguity also increases as you go higher up. And the number of people that you manage, and the IC to people management role, right, varies from role to role, right? So this is how you can probably evaluate your career graph and whether you've grown or not, right? Finally, I would like to end by saying that if you want to grow as a designer, right, apart from design articles and all, you need to read much more things broader than design, right? I think things like human behavior, psychology, productivity, habits, are generally very most ignored, right? So these are some of the books and the people which I refer to, right? I'll just give you a quick intro of what these books and these design leaders whom I follow, right? So Atomic Habits is generally about has I think it's a very important book for me, and I think it's made a huge difference in my life in terms of just adopting these small habits on a day basis, to help me be more productive and do more things in my job, right? uh, Design of everyday things, I think, is a very cliched, and everyone who's starting over design knows about Don Norman, and basics of design knowledge is there, right? This is one very good book I came across, which is Articulating Design Decision, right? A lot of times people struggle to communicate, right? How to present, what to present to stakeholders. So this book will generally give you a clear cut idea in terms of how to articulate your design decisions, right? Still Like an Artist is a very nice book, and it's a very short book, right? It talks about, no design is original, right? It says that every design is copied or, reference from somebody else. So good artists, uh, copy, great artists steal, right? So I think this is a very good book for any designer who wants to, take inspiration, from, multiple, things rather than just design, right? And I think it's a very must-have book for everyone. Predictably Irrational is a book generally about human behavior and psychology, and it talks about how human behaves while taking decisions, and emotional decisions related to buying, or making any decisions related to purchase, or anything, right? Making of a manager is, if you want to go into a leadership position, I think this is a very good book, right? By Julie Zhu, and she is basically she was the VP of design at Facebook, right? She was the initial design, and she progressed to Facebook, and she shares her journey of how she became from an IC to a manager, right? And there are these two other books which are generally for design, right? Universal Principles of Design, which are similar to and an extension to the data ramps, but it's more comprehensive in terms of a quick handbook. And Don't Make Me Think is basically some of these key design principles which design can use, right, in terms of how to make good designs. Then there are these design leaders who are there. Typically, Don Norman, who's basically the father of design, who's coined a term called user experience, as well as there is Jacob Nielsen as well, right? And there are these other, designers. One is Julie Zhu, Tana Christensen. Then Pablo Stanley is very popular on social media, and he's worked with multiple companies, and he's got a YouTube channel, and he is a lovely designer, right? And currently, I think he's working for Envision, right? Chris Do is basically a very famous, and he's got a YouTube channel. He talks generally about service design and freelancing, and what can you do to actually ace that, right? And there are these other two designers like Jesse Shaw Walter and Nick Bibish, right, who have also influenced me, right? So I think that's about it from my side, and I hope I was able to share some light in terms of my design learning, and I hope there were some takeaways for everyone in terms of how to go ahead in the design career and not make the same mistakes which I made in the design career, right? So thank you everyone for being so patient, and happy to take the Q&A if there any.
Hi, Dipen. Uh, I think thanks a lot for this amazing presentation. You covered each and everything from how to start as a designer and the career part of it, which is actually, I think, the most important part, how you should grow as a designer, how you should imagine yourself as a designer. And I think one of the mere coincidence happened that I've been reading this book recently, which you just mentioned in the list. I think in the studio we have all the books you have recently mentioned.
Right.
So I think that this is really great. Zuli Jo is something you should follow her actually, and
Yeah.
she's been with Facebook now. I think she started her own firm.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate her. So cool. I think before we move to the Q&A section, I have something to speak about. Like I'll just
Sure.
take 2 minutes.
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
So, hello everyone. You all know me. I'm Rashika, and I know most of you are already aware about ProApp. But for all those who are new, ProApp is a place to learn all things design, and we are on the mission to make design learning accessible and affordable to everyone. It helps you kickstart your design journey and grow as a designer. Currently, we have 75 plus design courses and more coming, like 3D design, design for product managers, and many others. We conduct these weekly workshops with design experts like Dipen himself. We're constantly evolving and are on a mission to make it as easy for you to start your journey in design. We are also coming up with some video content. We have already, moved 50% to the dark mode, and we're coming for master classes and collaborating with more design experts to make this design journey as easier as possible. And since you guys have supported us for so long, we are offering a special a lifetime membership of ProApp and 95% discount just for the workshop members who have attended today. And I'm pasting the link in the chat section. Here you go. It just a second. Yeah, just try and put the coupon code, which I'll also share in the chat. And the link is valid for next 30 minutes and for all the people who are there in the workshop. Awesome. Cool. I think, Dipen, let's move to the Q&A section, which,
Sure.
uh, okay. I work in a service-based company and the projects are confidential. How do I build a portfolio to showcase my expertise?
Right. So yeah, I think the answer for that is like typically whenever you are actually applying for a job, right? I think a lot of companies are actually aware of the fact that if you're working in a service based company, and you can't share, right? But what I would recommend you as a designer is you can at least explain the write the problem statement, take a couple of screenshots, and then tell the design recruiter as well as the design manager that if I'm shortlisted, then I will be able to share the entire portfolio of work, right? And I'm sure that apart from the work that you've already worked on in a service based company, right, typically the um, confidential work will also not be there for lifetime, right? At least it will be there for 6 months or a year, right? You need to be very aware in terms of how long the confidentiality agreement is, right? And then you can tell that I'll be able to showcase some of the work only in the interview, and the design manager or the recruiter will actually respect that, right? So apart from just showing this thing, you can also show some of the other work which will help the design manager actually get a sense of the kind of projects that you've worked on, right? You'll not just have one project. I think you might have 3 to 4 more projects as well, right? You can try and showcase that as well. Yeah, I think that would be the answer.
Awesome. Uh, okay, it's from Gauri. She wants to understand, if a fresher wants to build a resume, what, according to you, should be included? Course, project, of what type, software know-how? Also, are there any personal favorite course for UI UX which you should recommend to beginners?
Sure, yeah. I think I'll break this question into two parts, right? Firstly, I'll just try and answer the second part, which is what are some of the favorite courses on UI UX, and which I can recommend, right? Now, I think in the last few years there have been too many design courses, and a lot of people are self-trained designers, and they are trying to have their own cohorts and stuff like that, right? But typically, what I would say is, firstly, try and understand what uh, is it that you want to learn in design, right? Because as I mentioned, design is a very broad field, right? You want to become a creative designer, you want to become a visual user interface designer, or you want to become an experience designer, right? So firstly, there's too much free content which is available on the internet, just to read, right? And get information of which of the three fields you want to go in.
Right.
Secondly, you also can visit some of these people, right? There is a Nielsen Norman NNG group website. There is a Interaction Design Foundation. These are the two sites which are generally very useful in terms of just understanding the articles, as well as what are the design courses and the course contents which are there. Also, there are a lot of free YouTube courses which are available, which when you type free UI UX course, right, you just generally get a sense of what they are trying to cover, right? And then if you get a broad idea, right, then you can try and see whether you want to invest around 5,000 or 50,000 or 1 lakh, or as much in terms of getting a certification or taking a UI UX course. So I would say, firstly, do your research in terms of which field you want to go in. Then read articles, as well as search for YouTube in terms of understanding what they are trying to teach. And then if you are still feeling that it is less, that I think you can join the Nielsen Norman, or you can go to the Interaction Design Foundation course, which is there, right? Or there is HFI, right? These are a few
Right.
which I can talk about. Second question is generally about how I wanted to ask if there's how to build a resume and what should be included, right? I think this is what I've tried to include, right? Firstly, try and tell the facts, right? Whether you are from a design field, or you are what all companies that you've worked for, how many years you've worked for, and what exactly is the problem space you worked on, right? Typically showing, also, don't fake in your CV that you need Figma, Sketch, XD, and this thing, right? Just tell the facts that actually, if you knew one or two design tools, if you know two or three things, like let's say a wireframing, prototyping, or user journey, just write that, right? I think the more authentic you are in your resume, that will really highlight. And also, what was your contribution in the role, will actually help in terms of understanding, and for the recruiter to understand what you've worked on, right? So these are the two things that I would probably look at.
Okay. There are some mentors taking classes with fees that ranges from INR 50,000 and 1 lakh. Is it advisable to take up such classes, or how do we find it if it will be helpful with regard to knowledge?
Right. I think again, I would say, the credibility of the person, right? You need to do research about, who that person is, how many years of experience, what kind of organizations that the person or has worked on, how, there might be, peers who've also, or there can be, Slack channels or other things which are there, right? You can ask, a lot of people in forums, understanding, if they have taken it, what was their experience, right? I think it really is a waste to spend 50 to 1 lakh rupees, before doing any drawings. I'm not saying it is going to be good or bad, but for each designer the experience is different, right? So understanding who's taking it, and whether it is going to helpful for you in your design career, it generally helps, right? So I would say do proper research and then go into spending. There's no good or bad, but it's all about the credibility of the person who's actually designing the course and how long it is, right? Yeah.
Right. Mm, okay. Cool. It's again from Gauri. Cool. Thanks. Also, do you think not having a degree in this field has created any sort of disadvantage for you while hiring process?
Um, Well, I would say initial part of my career, right? I think I was a bit frustrated. The reason I have been able to stick in the design field for so long is basically, I would recommend to you initial part of your career, right? I think you should have, good mentors, right? If you have good mentors around you and good peers, right? I think that will really help you in terms of the direction as well as, learning, right? Um, I think I was very lucky in terms of having good peers across, and I was very curious in terms of design as a field, right? So that's why I evolved from a graphic designer to a UI designer to a lead UX designer right now, right? So curiosity as well as having the right peers to guide you will really help in terms of navigating you through the design field. Disadvantage? No, I think design. I think if you notice, right? Um, there have been a lot of people now who are jumping into design, right? There I've seen CAs also who are actually going to design. There have been MBAs. There have been people from engineering who are going into design, and then there are people who are actually design from design schools, right? So I think there is a vast majority of people who are actually looking for a design space. In the end, it's about the knowledge that you have, right? And the curiosity that will help you survive in the design space. So there's no disadvantage as long as you are curious and you want to stay in the design field for a long period of time.
Right. Okay. Guys, do you have any more questions? You can post it in the Q&A section. We have him for more 5 to 10 minutes. Okay, there was a question in the chat section. Yeah. How do a graphic designer from Nigeria get a good pay internationally?
Well, I can generally talk in a broader sense, right? If you're a graphic designer or a visual designer, visual interface designer, or a UX designer, right? If you are good at your job, right? And if you know so there is a very good book which I read called the Almanac of Naval Ravikant, right? So he talks about just two things, right? If you want to be very good, right? Firstly, learn to build, and then learn to sell, right? So if you are very good at your craft, right, be it graphic design, right, then, and if you are also good at selling and influencing your design, right, then no one can stop you in terms of uh, getting a very good package, either internationally or in India or wherever, right? So I would say, learn the art of influencing, and understand what people are looking for and try to solve their problem. They will pay you as much as you demand, right? That's what I would say.
Cool. Okay, Dipin, what motivated you to enter design? Like, it's a question from me. Like, since you said you're from a commerce background, I'm from an engineering background, and I was working in Bangalore only for 5 years in IBM, and then I moved to Accenture, and then I quit my job and moved to design industry. I started as a UX writer, content writer, and then marketing, and then co-founding this particular application. So my motivation was because I found it something, like I'm very eager to connect with people, and design allowed me to do that.
Right.
So what motivated you?
Okay. So yeah, I think design happened to me by chance, right? Generally I was very creative, right? I used to like sketching, when I was young, right? And so back then I did not know, there was a design school and there was a proper design course and stuff like that, right? It happened to me by chance, right? And I did not have anyone to guide me, because there that point in time there was only art, science, and commerce when I graduated, and design was not even really very popular, right? But I think I was lucky that my parents were very supportive of my decision of doing, and I got lucky, that I so I have actually done a 1 year course from an institute called National Center for Software Technology, where I learned programming as well, right? C++, Java, and all. And that's when I realized that programming is not really my cup of tea. And parallelly, I
Right,
had done a 6 months course from an institute called Workstation. It was similar to NIIT or Aptech, or this thing where they teach you some of the basic tools, right? And that point in time,
right,
Photoshop, Dreamweaver, and all was very popular, right? So
right,
what I realized that I did not want to go into the CA, MBA, and stuff like that, and generally creativity and this thing aesthetics really motivated me, and that's how I started my design job. And because of my curiosity, right, I started getting bored after a point in time. So initially I was a graphic designer, then I realized that there's a limit to it. Then as I joined company called rediff.com, then I understood the design process. I learned about visual design, interface design, and all, right? And as I moved to Bangalore and worked with companies like Flipkart and other companies, right, I transitioned to a UX design as well, right? So I think it's been a roller coaster ride, and I think the continuous curiosity has to learn more in the field of design has actually helped me to be where I am.
cool. I think we are done with all the questions. So I would just take a moment to say thank you for doing this with us and supporting us in this mission. It's because of people like you that we are able to do this. And I always say this, I truly trust in the design community, and how supportive they are of each other. I could not find it in any other industry, like till the time I've worked in it. So thank you for doing this with us, and uh, I'm sharing the links of Dipen's profile in the chat section. Like, you can reach out to him in terms of any issues or connect with him, understand with him, and I think he would be more than happy to help.
Thanks,
Thank you,
thanks for
Dipen.
inviting me and giving me the opportunity. I think I also had a good time, and I think platforms like you are actually helping designers to actually learn about the broad field of design. And I think design is a very small community in general, right? People are generally very helpful and supportive. So I think I
Right.
really like the cause that you guys are doing, and I wish you guys also all the best in terms of your work that you guys do.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, everyone. The link is valid for 15 more minutes, and you can pay uh, and get the lifetime subscription of ProApp, and keep enjoying all the new features that we are adding and the new courses and the master classes. Thank you for joining with us today. Keep following us on Instagram and be stay updated about the workshops that we conduct and the courses which goes live. Thank you so much. Have a great weekend.
Thank you. Bye.